People start talking real different to you once you cross 70. Their voices slow down. Their words get softer, like you might shatter if they say the wrong thing. Haha, I noticed that before I noticed anything else. I'm 73, still living in the same house I raised my kids in, still cooking my own food, still paying my own bills. But somehow, after one bad flu and a night in the hospital, my son and my daughter decided I was suddenly fragile, not sick, manageable. That's the word they never said out loud, but kept using anyway. They started dropping by more often, sitting at my table like they were having meetings instead of visits, talking about safety and planning, and just in case. One afternoon, my son leaned back in his chair and said, "Mom, we should probably open a joint account." He said it casual, like he was asking me to switch cable plans. My daughter nodded real quick, too quick, and added, "It's just easier that way. For emergencies." Emergencies. Funny how emergencies always involve someone else touching your money. I didn't answer right away. I stirred my coffee slow, watched the spoon circle, felt the room settle. They waited. That told me everything. I asked a few questions, on purpose, real simple ones, just to see how fast they answered. Too fast. Rehearsed fast. I could hear the plan underneath the concern. And instead of pushing back, instead of arguing or calling it out, I smiled. Small, tired, the kind of smile people trust. "If you think it's best," I said. The relief on their faces damn near made me laugh. They thought they'd won something. What they didn't know what nobody ever knows until it's too late, that silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. And I had all the time in the world. I didn't say yes because I needed help. I said yes because I needed to see something clearly. That's the part people always miss about old women. We stop guessing and start observing. After they brought up the joint account, my house felt different. Not tense, not angry, alert. Like the air itself was waiting to see what I'd do next. My son pulled out his phone that same evening, already checking banks, already talking about interest rates and convenience, like he'd been thinking about it way before he ever asked me. My daughter chimed in with that soft voice she uses when she thinks she's being kind, explaining things I already knew, slowing her words like I couldn't keep up. Haha, that tone right there. That was the giveaway. I've lived long enough to know the difference between care and control. Care asks, control explains. I asked where the idea came from. They exchanged a look quick. Practice Dan said they'd just been worried about me. Worried since when? Since I paid every bill on time for decades. Since I survived my husband's death without missing a mortgage payment, I let that slide. I wanted to see how far the worry went. We went to the bank a few days later. They walked ahead of me like they were already owners of my life, talking to the clerk, finishing my sentences. I stayed quiet, nodded, asked the teller to repeat things even when I didn't need it. The more I acted unsure, the more confident they got. Damn, confidence grows fast when people think you're fading. Papers were printed. Lines were highlighted. Pens were handed to me like tools instead of weapons. I signed slow, real slow, feeling every stroke of my name, knowing exactly what account this was going to be and, more important, what it wasn't. Because here's the truth, they never bothered to ask about. My real savings weren't sitting in my everyday checking anymore. I moved those years ago, quietly, legally, clean as daylight. This joint account. It was bait, a test, a mirror. I watched their faces when the account was approved, relief, mixed with excitement they didn't even try to hide. They thought they were stepping into responsibility. What they were stepping into was exposure. And as we walked out of that bank, my daughter squeezed my arm and said, "You did the right thing, Mom." I smiled again, that same tired smile. Yeah, I did. Just not for the reason you think. The first time money moved, it was small enough to look harmless. That's how they do it. Nobody jumps straight into the deep end. A couple $100, labeled groceries. A little transfer here, marked gas. I noticed because I always notice. I check my statements like some folks check the weather, out of habit, not fear. When I saw the withdrawal, I didn't react, didn't call, didn't ask. I wanted to see what they'd do if I said nothing. Silence tells people what they're allowed to try next. A few days later, my son mentioned buying things for me. I never asked for new towels, pantry items I already had. My daughter nodded along, talking about how it all comes from the joint account anyway, like that explained everything. Haha, listen to that language. Anyway, that's the sound of permission being assumed. I thanked them. I even joked about how fancy the towels were, like I was impressed. They relaxed. You could see it in their shoulders. That's when I knew the test had started working. Over the next week, more small amounts moved. Still nothing dramatic, still justifiable if you squinted hard enough. I let it all happen. I kept cooking my own meals, driving my own car, living exactly the same, just to see how far they'd push once they realized I wasn't checking. The answer came quick. My daughter said, "Mom, it's easier if we just handle it." Handle what? My life. My money. She smiled when she said it, like she was proud. Damn, that part hurt, I won't lie. But pain sharpens the picture, and the picture was getting real clear. They weren't stealing yet, not in their minds. They were reallocating, redefining, testing how quiet I'd stay. And I stayed quiet, all right. Because the joint account wasn't about money anymore. It was about character. And character always shows itself once it thinks nobody's watching. Once people think you're quiet, they start thinking you're okay with things you never agreed to. That's when lines get crossed without anyone announcing it. After the first few withdrawals, the joint account started feeling less like an emergency net and more like a shared wallet, shared mostly in one direction. My son stopped mentioning amounts altogether. My daughter started talking in summaries instead of details, like I didn't need to know the breakdown anymore. "We took care of it," she'd say, waving her hand like that closed the subject. Haha, that wave told me everything. I watched how fast they got comfortable spending money that wasn't technically theirs. How quick helping mom turned into, "We'll just use this." They talked about budgets like they were doing me a favor. Even joked once about how I'd never notice a few hundred missing here or there. That one landed heavy. Not because of the money, but because of the assumption. I nodded, smiled, let the comment slide right past like it didn't stick. Inside though, I was taking notes, mental ones, sharp and exact. The withdrawals got bigger after that. Still spaced out, still dressed up as necessities, but bigger. My daughter bought herself something on sale and laughed about how she'd pay it back later. Later is a dangerous word. It stretches forever when nobody's holding it accountable. I didn't confront them. I didn't warn them. I wanted to see the full picture, not just the corner they were willing to show me. I started asking questions in the wrong order on purpose, just to see if they'd correct me. They didn't. They just kept talking. Talking too much. Explaining too little. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about trust anymore. It was about entitlement, growing legs. And entitlement walks faster once it realizes nobody's stopping it. I went to bed that night feeling calm in a way that surprised me. Not numb. Not angry. Just settled. Because once people reveal who they are, the waiting stops being painful. It becomes practical, and I was done guessing. I stopped asking questions on purpose after that. Not because I didn't have any, trust me, I had plenty, but because questions give people a chance to perform. And I wasn't interested in performances anymore. I wanted habits, patterns. The stuff folks do when they think nobody's checking the scoreboard. My son started using the joint account like it was a buffer for his own cash flow, floating himself just until payday. My daughter got bolder, too, talked about expenses like they were already approved. Like I was just a name on the account, not the person who earned every damn dollar in it. Haha. That shift was subtle but loud if you knew how to listen. They'd say things like, "It's all family money anyway," or "You'd want us to use it if we needed it." That's how people rewrite permission after the fact. I kept my routine steady, paid my bills the same way, bought my groceries with my own card. Never once dipped into the joint account for myself, which they never even noticed. That part told me a lot. If they were really doing this for me, they'd have paid attention to how I used it. But they weren't watching me, they were watching the balance. I overheard a conversation one evening, voices low but not low enough, my son saying, "She hasn't said a thing." My daughter replied, "I told you she wouldn't." Damn, that sentence hit harder than any withdrawal. Because it wasn't about money anymore, it was about me being predictable in there. Eyes safe, quiet, contained. I went to sleep that night with a clear head and a steady heart, knowing the test was working exactly how it needed to. You don't stop people when they're telling you the truth about themselves. You let them keep talking. The funny thing about comfort is it makes people sloppy. Once they stopped checking with me, they stopped checking anything. The joint account turned into background noise for them, something that existed to smooth their days, not something that needed attention or respect. My son stopped texting before transfers. My daughter stopped explaining after the fact. They'd just move money and keep talking, like the balance would always be there because it had always been there before. Haha, that's when I knew we'd crossed from testing into assuming. I pulled the statements every week, quiet as ever, watching patterns stack up like bricks. Same days, same amounts, same excuses dressed up different ways. Rent help one week, temporary loan the next. A purchase that had nothing to do with me but somehow still landed on my account. I never corrected them. I never flinched. I let them believe the balance was endless, like it grew back overnight. That illusion is powerful. It makes people careless with gratitude. They started arguing with each other about how to use it, like I wasn't even part of the equation. One afternoon, my daughter snapped, "It's not like she's using it," and my son laughed. Damn, that laugh echoed. Not because it hurt, because it clarified. I realized something then. The moment people stop seeing you as a person, they start seeing you as a resource. And resources get drained. I slept fine that night, real fine, because clarity does that. I wasn't angry, I wasn't sad. I was ready. The balance they stopped checking. It wasn't just numbers on a page anymore, it was a record. And records don't forget. Help turns into habit faster than people realize. One minute, it's just this once. Next thing you know, it's baked into how they plan their month. I watched that happen in real time. My son started counting on the joint account before he counted his own paycheck. My daughter talked about upcoming expenses like they were already covered, already approved, already mine to absorb. Haha, that's the thing about habits, they don't announce themselves. They just settle in and act like they belong. I stayed exactly the same. Same quiet mornings, same small errands, same nods when they talked too much and said too little. The more normal I looked, the bolder they got. They started using words like "we" when talking about the money, like ownership had quietly shifted while I was busy being old in their heads. One night, my son said, "We should keep some buffer in there," and my daughter replied, "Don't worry, she never touches it." That sentence hung in the air a second too long. I kept my eyes on the TV, laughed at the wrong part on purpose, let them believe I hadn't heard. Inside, though, I filed it away. Because now it was official, I wasn't a participant anymore. I was a guarantee. And guarantees get leaned on hard. I noticed how they stopped asking if something was okay and started asking how much was left. That's when you know the line's gone. Not crossed, gone. Still, I didn't move. I didn't warn them. I let the habit grow roots. Because once it's a habit, it's evidence. And evidence speaks louder than arguments ever could. There came a day when I didn't move a single dollar, didn't check a balance, didn't even open the app, and That's when everything shifted. Funny, right? You'd think action changes things, but nah. Sometimes stillness does the loudest talking. That morning, I made my coffee, sat by the window, and let the phone stay face down on the table like it didn't run my life anymore. By afternoon, my daughter called, voice tight but pretending it wasn't. She asked if I'd moved money. Not needed money. Not used money. Just moved it. I said no, slow and calm, like it was the most normal thing in the world. There was a pause on the line, longer than usual, the kind where people do math in their head and don't like the answer. She covered it quick, laughed a little, said she was just checking. Checking what, though? That's what I wanted to ask, but didn't. Later that evening, my son stopped by unannounced. He walked straight to the kitchen like he belonged there, opened the fridge, talked fast about expenses, about timing, about how things had been tight lately. Tight for who? I listened. I nodded. I didn't offer solutions. That's when the truth finally poked its head out when nobody rescued them from their own assumptions. They weren't panicking yet, not fully, but I could feel the shift. They were realizing the joint account wasn't a bottomless well anymore, it was just an account. And accounts answer to rules, not expectations. I went to bed that night knowing something important had happened. Not out loud, not on paper, but in their minds. They'd leaned too hard for too long, and now they were testing the ground. And the ground, for the first time, didn't move for them. Counting changes people. You can see it in their eyes when numbers stop being abstract and start feeling personal. After that day I moved nothing. They started counting days transfers, excuses. My son texted more often, little check-ins wrapped in jokes, trying to feel out the edges without admitting he was nervous. My daughter asked questions sideways, like she didn't want answers so much as reassurance. "You good, Mom?" she'd say, and I'd tell her I was fine because I was. Fine wasn't the word they were hoping for. They wanted flexible. They wanted quiet. I stayed neither. I watched them do math out loud, talk about timing and cash flow, act like the joint account had always come with conditions they'd just discovered. Haha. Funny how rules appear when convenience disappears. I didn't change my tone or my routine. I let them feel the difference between help and dependency without explaining it for them. One evening, my son slipped and said, "We just gotta get through this month," like it was a team effort I'd agreed to. I didn't correct him. I didn't agree either. Silence again, my favorite tool. The room filled with it, thick and uncomfortable, and he talked himself right out of it, backtracking, laughing too loud. That's when I knew they'd started counting, not just money, but risk. Counting how far they could push. Counting how quiet I'd stay. Counting whether the ground would still catch them if they leaned. And the more they counted, the steadier I felt. Because when people finally start counting, it means the free ride is over. Worry has a sound to it once you know how to hear it. It speeds people up, sharpens their voices, makes them explain things nobody asked about. I started hearing it in my kids' calls right away. My daughter talked faster now, like she was trying to outrun her own thoughts, filling space with details that didn't matter. My son kept repeating himself, circling the same points, like if he said them enough times, they'd turn true. Ha ha. I let them talk. I always did. I noticed how they stopped joking about the joint account and started framing it like a responsibility again, like they were remembering the script they'd dropped weeks ago. "We're just making sure everything's okay," my daughter said one afternoon, voice tight. I told her everything was fine because it was. Fine isn't comforting when people are used to control. They wanted certainty on their terms. They wanted me to step in, smooth it over, move money like I used to so they could stop thinking about it. I didn't. I stayed steady. I listened to the worry leak through their words, heard it in the pauses, the sudden politeness, the careful way they asked questions they already knew the answers to. I watched them start planning around the idea that the account might not always be there for them to lean on. That shift mattered. Because once people start planning, they stop assuming. And assumptions are where entitlement lives. I slept good those nights. Not smug. Not satisfied. Just calm. The kind of calm you get when you finally understand the shape of the situation and your place in it. Worry sounded different in their voices now, and I didn't need to name it for them. They were hearing it too. People only get extra nice when they're nervous. That's something I learned a long time ago, and it never fails. After worry settled in, politeness showed up dressed like concern. My daughter started bringing food again, things I didn't ask for, setting bags on the counter like peace offerings. My son called before coming over, asked if it was a good time, waited for answers instead of assuming. Haha, that shift spoke louder than any apology. They asked questions carefully now, wrapped in compliments and soft tones, like they were stepping on thin ice and knew it. "You doing okay with money, Mom?" My daughter asked one evening, smiling a little too hard. I told her yes. Not because I wanted to reassure her, but because it was the truth. I was doing just fine. That answer landed wrong. It didn't open doors. It closed them. I could see them recalibrating in real time, trying to figure out what changed without asking the one question they were scared of. The joint account stopped coming up casually. Now it only appeared when they had a reason, a need, a timing issue. They framed it like teamwork again, like the early days, but the confidence was gone. Confidence don't come back once it cracks. I stayed consistent, same tone, same pace, same refusal to rush. No lectures, no warnings, just presence. The house felt quieter, steadier, like it had settled into a new truth. I realized something then. I didn't need to confront them to take control back. All I had to do was stop carrying what wasn't mine. And once I did that, they felt the weight of it immediately. The moment didn't come with a fight or a confession. It came quiet, like most real realizations do. I saw it on my son's face. First, this brief pause in his talk, like he'd finally reached the end of a sentence and didn't know how to keep going. My daughter noticed it a beat later, eyes narrowing just a little, doing math that had nothing to do with numbers. They sat at my table one evening, coffee untouched, talking around the joint account without naming it, and that's when it clicked for them. I wasn't stepping in anymore. I wasn't filling gaps. I wasn't smoothing over mistakes or covering timing issues. Haha, I wasn't playing backup. They tried once more, real gentle this time, asked if I wanted them to handle things again like before. I looked at them, calm as ever, and said I was comfortable managing my own money. Comfortable. That word hit like a wall. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just final. You could feel the air shift, like the room itself understood something had changed. They didn't argue. Didn't push. They just sat there, absorbing it. Realizing the joint account wasn't a safety net anymore, it was exactly what it had always been. Mine, shared by choice, not entitlement. I didn't explain my reasons. I didn't need to. Explanations invite debate, and there was nothing left to debate. When they left that night, the house felt lighter, like it had shed something it didn't need. I went to bed knowing the test was over. Not because they'd admitted anything, but because they'd finally seen me clearly. And once people see you clearly, they can't unsee it. There was a lot I didn't say that night, and that wasn't weakness. It was choice. Words have a way of turning moments into arguments, and I wasn't interested in arguing anymore. I watched my kids walk out the door with their shoulders a little heavier, their steps slower than when they came in, and I knew they were carrying questions they didn't want to ask. Good. Questions are where growth starts. I sat back down at the table after they left, picked up my mug, realized the coffee had gone cold, and laughed softly to myself. Haha, funny how peace shows up in small details like that. I didn't feel the need to chase them down with explanations or justifications. I didn't owe them a recap of my decisions or a lesson on boundaries. I'd already given them the lesson by changing my behavior. That's the part people miss. Real change doesn't announce itself, it just stops cooperating with old expectations. I thought about all the times I'd stepped in before, smoothed things over, covered a gap, moved money without being asked, just so nobody had to feel uncomfortable. Damn. That habit had been heavy. Letting it go felt like setting down a bag I didn't even remember picking up. I went through my evening routine slow and steady, locked the doors, turned off the lights, and climbed into bed without replaying the conversation in my head. That was new. Usually, I'd lie there rewriting scenes, wondering if I should have said more, done more. Not this time. This time, I trusted the silence to do its job, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all and let people sit with what that nothing really means. After that night, the joint account went quiet. Not empty quiet, no sudden moves, no emergencies, no late-night texts asking if I could float something real quick. Silence like that tells a story all by itself. I checked the statements, like I always did, steady and calm, and saw the change plain as day. Transfers slowed, then stopped. The balance held. Funny how fast behavior adjusts once people realize the floor isn't padded anymore. My son called less. When he did, it was about normal stuff, work, the weather, nothing urgent. My daughter's tone shifted to you. She asked before assuming, waited instead of filling the gaps. Haha, respect sounds like patience when you finally hear it. I didn't bring up the account. I didn't need to. The absence of movement said more than any lecture could. I kept living my days the same way, paying my bills, cooking my meals, choosing my pace. And in that steadiness, something settled between us. Not perfect harmony, not a fairy tale ending, just a new understanding. The joint account had done its job. It showed me who leaned, who listened, and who adjusted when the rules got real. And as the days rolled on without drama, I felt lighter, clearer, and fully back in my own hands. Normal came back slow, like it didn't want to spook anyone. No big apologies, no dramatic sit-downs, just days stacking up without tension hanging over them. My kids started acting like adults again instead of managers, which I appreciated more than any sorry they could have offered. Conversations felt lighter, not fake light, trio light. The kind where nobody's watching their words too close or checking the room for reactions. I noticed how they stopped circling money topics, stopped testing the edges, stopped looking at me like I might cave if they pushed just a little. Haha. Turns out, consistency is louder than confrontation. I kept doing what I'd been doing, nothing extra, nothing less. Paid my bills, ran my errands, lived my life without rushing to prove I could still handle it. That last part mattered. I didn't need to prove a damn thing anymore. One afternoon, my daughter asked my opinion about something unrelated. Waited for the answer, actually waited, and nodded when I gave it. That small moment told me everything had shifted. Respect doesn't show up with fireworks. It shows up with patience. I slept better too. No more late night thinking about balances or intentions or whether I was being taken advantage of. My mind finally unclenched. Normal felt good, not boring, not empty, just steady. And steady, after everything, felt like a win. Trust didn't come back the way it left. It came back slower, quieter, with conditions it never needed before. And honestly, I was okay with that. Blind trust is for people who haven't been tested yet. This kind of trust, the reset kind, was built on awareness. My son started asking instead of assuming, even for small things. My daughter checked in without circling toward money or favors, like she finally understood that access to me wasn't automatic anymore. Haha. Funny how boundaries clean up intentions real quick. I didn't hover or audit them. Didn't bring up the past like a scoreboard. I let the new behavior speak for itself. Some days felt almost ordinary again, coffee at the table, casual talk, laughter that didn't carry an edge. Other days were quieter, more careful, like everyone was still learning the new rules. I let that be. Growth needs space, not pressure. I noticed something else too. I trusted myself more than I ever had. That was the real shift. I didn't second-guess my instincts or downplay my discomfort. If something felt off, I paused. If something felt right, I moved. No rush, no guilt. The joint account sat there like a reminder, not a temptation. A record of what happened and what changed. And as days kept rolling, I realized this wasn't about fixing my kids or teaching lessons. It was about recalibrating my own life, putting trust back where it belonged, starting with me. I didn't realize how heavy things had been until they weren't anymore. That's how weight works. It sneaks up on you, settles into your bones, and convinces you it's just part of getting older. One morning, I woke up and noticed my chest felt lighter, like I wasn't bracing for a conversation that hadn't happened yet. Ha ha, that caught me off guard. I went through my day slow, deliberate, paying attention to how my body moved now that it wasn't carrying quiet stress. I made breakfast without checking my phone first. Sat down to eat instead of standing like I used to when my mind was racing. The joint account barely crossed my thoughts anymore, and that told me everything. It had stopped being a problem because I'd stopped letting it define my role. My kids felt the change too, even if they didn't name it. They didn't come in hot anymore, didn't bring urgency into my house like it belonged there. Conversations stayed on track. Requests came with pauses. Pauses matter. They show respect better than any apology ever could. I thought back to how easily I'd slipped into covering gaps before moving money just to keep things smooth. Absorbing stress so nobody else had to feel it. Damn. That habit had been heavy. Letting it go felt like setting down a bag I'd been carrying so long, I forgot it wasn't mine to hold. I started trusting the quiet again. Trusting that I didn't have to jump in for things to be okay. And the world didn't fall apart. If anything, it adjusted. The part people don't expect you don't have to hold everything together for things to stay standing. Sometimes you just step back and let people carry what they picked up themselves. The weight lifted not because someone fixed things for me, but because I stopped fixing them for everyone else. And that shift, that was freedom, real and earned. Boundaries ain't loud when they're real. They don't shout or threaten or explain themselves twice. They just sit there and hold. I felt that truth settle in one afternoon when my son casually mentioned a bill he was stressed about, then stopped mid-sentence like he caught himself. He didn't finish it with a request. Didn't slide into that old of expecting me to cover the gap. Haha. That pause right there. That was growth. My daughter did the same thing later that week. Started talking about something she wanted. Then shrugged and said she'd figure it out. No glance at me. No waiting for rescue. I nodded, kept listening, felt something solid under my feet. The boundaries were working not because I enforced them, but because I lived inside them consistently. That consistency changed the tone of everything. My house stopped feeling like a safety net for other people's choices and started feeling like my space again. I noticed how calm conversations stayed even when topics got uncomfortable. No pressure. No emotional shortcuts. Just adults talking to adults. I didn't feel the need to over-explain why things were different now. Explanations weaken boundaries when they turn into negotiations. I just stayed steady. Some days I thought about how scared I used to be of upsetting people, of being seen as difficult or selfish just for saying no. Damn. That fear had kept me bending for years. Now, I could say no softly and still sleep like a baby. That's power people don't talk about enough. As time passed, the joint account became just another account, useful, neutral, not loaded with meaning anymore. And I realized something deep and satisfying. Boundaries don't just protect you from others. They protect you from becoming someone you don't recognize anymore. Respect didn't come back all at once. It grew back in pieces, like something fragile that needed time before you could trust it to hold weight again. I noticed it in the way my kids talk to me now. not around me. They didn't lower their voices like I might break, didn't rush through explanations like I couldn't follow. They spoke straight, looked me in the eye, waited for my response instead of filling the space for me. Haha. That waiting part meant everything. My son asked for advice one afternoon and actually listened to it. Didn't argue, didn't half hear it while planning his next sentence. My daughter checked plans with me instead of informing me after the fact. Small shifts, sure, but real ones. I didn't celebrate them out loud. I let them exist without pressure. Respect grows better when it isn't put on display. I felt calmer around them too, less guarded, less alert for the moment when I'd need to step in and protect myself. The joint account faded further into the background, no longer a test or a temptation. Just a tool that behaved exactly how it was supposed to. Now, I trusted myself enough not to hover over it. That trust was new, and it felt good. Nights were quiet again, in the best way. No replaying conversations, no wondering if I should have spoken up more or softened something. I'd said what needed saying by changing how I lived. And that kind of message doesn't get ignored. Respect had grown back, not because anyone apologized, but because everyone adjusted. And that, right there, was better than sorry. I stopped thinking about money as numbers after that and started thinking about it as behavior. That's the accounting that matters. You can read a statement and know where the dollars went, but you watch people long enough and you learn where respect goes when it's not being supervised. My kids were different now. Not careful, not scared, just aware. They checked themselves without being told. They paused before speaking. They asked before acting. Haha. Turns out accountability doesn't need an audience. It just needs consistency. I kept mine. Same pace, same tone, same refusal to rush. When something came up, I addressed it straight. No drama, no lecture. When nothing came up, I enjoyed the quiet. That balance felt right. I noticed how the house held that calm too, like it recognized the rhythm and decided to keep it. Even the joint account behaved steady, untouched unless it had a reason to be, boring in the best way. Boring means healthy. I trusted that. I trusted myself more. I trusted the space I'd built by not filling every gap and not rescuing every stumble. And in that trust, I found something better than control. Ease, not the lazy kind, the earned kind. The kind that shows up when you stop negotiating your place and start living from it. I wasn't watching for mistakes anymore. I wasn't bracing for asks. I was present, fully, and that presence kept everyone honest without me saying a word. I didn't need a final scene to know the story had settled. No big reveal, no apology tour, no victory lap. Life just kept going, and that was the point. The joint account stayed quiet, predictable, boring in the healthiest way. My kids kept showing up as adults who understood the difference between access and respect. I kept showing up as myself, steady, clear, unhurried. Funny how simple things get once you stop explaining them. I spent my days doing what I liked, not what smoothed things over. I paid attention to how it felt to choose without guilt, to pause without fear, to say yes or no without rehearsing it in my head first. That peace didn't come from money or leverage or timing. It came from finally trusting my own instincts and sticking to them. When I thought back on it all, I didn't feel bitterness. I felt clarity. The joint account wasn't a mistake, it was a mirror. It showed me who leaned too hard, who adjusted when the rules got real, and who respected me once I stopped carrying weight that wasn't mine. And the best part, I didn't have to say a damn thing to make that happen. I lived it. I stayed consistent. I let behavior speak. That's the kind of accounting that balances itself. And as I closed the door each night, house quiet and mind at ease, I knew this much for sure. I didn't lose anything worth keeping. I gained my pace, my peace, and my place. And that was more than enough. If there's one thing this whole thing taught me, it's that you don't need to fight loud to win quiet. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I didn't even explain myself much. I just stopped carrying what wasn't mine, and the truth did the rest. People always think strength looks like confrontation, but sometimes it looks like patience with a spine. Haha. I learned that late, but not too late. My son learned it. My daughter learned it. And I learned to trust myself more than I ever had. Money came and went. Accounts opened and settled. But the real change, that stayed. Because once people know you see clearly, they stop trying to move you in the dark. If this story made you think, like the video to support original storytelling. Subscribe to Payback Files for more powerful, fictional stories about patience, family, and quiet strength. Comment below and tell us, would you have stayed silent or spoken up earlier? Welcome to Payback Files, where every story ends with payback.